Abandoned places had always called to me. Something about the echo of forgotten lives, their silence, their stories, made me feel alive. I had filmed a dozen documentaries about derelict factories, ghost towns, and crumbling theaters, but Hollow Creek Asylum was different. Its shadow loomed over every project I'd ever tackled. The asylum had been closed for 40 years, its gates locked after allegations of abuse and mysterious disappearances. Locals whispered of its most infamous resident, a patient who was said to have murdered several staff members with a makeshift hook after losing his hand in a supposed accident. When the asylum closed, he had vanished, but people claimed he never left. I arrived at Hollow Creek just as the sun dipped behind the horizon, my camera gear strapped to my back. The front gate, rusted and overgrown with ivy, groaned as I pushed it open. For a moment, I hesitated, the air thick with the weight of something unseen. But curiosity was my constant companion, and tonight was no different. The main entrance was boarded up, but a shattered window provided an unwelcoming invitation. I slid through, careful to avoid jagged edges, and landed in the reception area. The stench of mildew and decay hit me immediately. My flashlight revealed a desk piled with crumbling patient files, a wheelchair tipped on its side, and graffiti scrawled across the walls. I pressed record on my camera. November 12th, Hollow Creek Asylum, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the creak of the building settling. Abandoned since 1983, this place has been the center of countless ghost stories and urban legends. Tonight, we'll see what's fact and what's fiction. The first hour was uneventful. I filmed the decaying hallways, the remnants of patient rooms with rusted beds and faded restraints, and the morgue where empty body drawers hung open like yawning mouths. Still, the sense of being watched clung to me like a second skin. Then I heard it. A metallic scrape echoed down the hall, faint at first, then louder. I paused, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, but the sound continued, steady, deliberate. I turned a corner and froze. Long, deep gouges marred the plaster walls, parallel lines carved with unsettling precision. My heart hammered as I scanned the corridor with my flashlight. A shadow flickered at the far end, and my breath caught in my throat. "Hello," I called, my voice wavering. The shadow didn't respond, but it shifted. It moved, and then I saw him. He was gaunt, his frame hunched and unnatural, his skin pale and stretched taut over sharp bones. His eyes glinted in the light, feral and unblinking. But it was his hand, or what replaced it, that paralyzed me with terror. A crude, jagged hook gleamed in the dim light, dragging against the floor as he stepped forward. I stumbled back, my camera clutched tightly. He tilted his head, like a predator studying its prey, and then he moved, faster than I thought possible. Shit! I turned and ran, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I bolted down the hallway. Behind me, the metallic scrape quickened, punctuated by the heavy thud of his boots. I ducked into a room and slammed the door, throwing my weight against it. My chest heaved as I fumbled to barricade it with a rusted gurney. The hook scraped against the wood, slow at first, then harder, more insistent. "Help me!" I screamed into my phone, but there was no signal. I scanned the room for an escape. The only option was a shattered window high on the wall. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I climbed onto a cabinet and hoisted myself up, the jagged edges of the glass tearing at my jacket. Behind me, the door splintered, the hook bursting through with a deafening crack. I didn't look back. I threw myself out the window, landing hard on the overgrown grass below. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to stand, limping toward the gate. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. When the police arrived, the asylum was silent. They found the room I had barricaded, the shattered door, and the deep gouges in the walls. But of the hook man, there was no trace. I handed over my footage, desperate for validation. Most of it was uneventful, empty hallways, dusty relics of the past, but the final frame chilled me to my core. As I scrambled through the window, my camera had captured a single shot of the doorway, and there, bathed in shadows, were two glowing eyes staring directly at me. I don't know what I expected after that night. Closure, perhaps, or answers. Instead, I got nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the asylum, the metallic scrape growing louder, closer. And sometimes, in the stillness of my apartment, I swear I hear it again, the sound of a hook dragging across the floor. I had always prided myself on being fearless. My brother Dylan and I were the adventurous types, always chasing the next thrill. From cliff diving to sneaking into old, abandoned places, we lived for that rush. So when our friend Zach brought up the legend of the Hook Man during one of our late-night campfires, it was only a matter of time before we decided to see if the rumors were true. The Hook Man, as the story went, was a miner at Blackwater Mines, a sprawling underground labyrinth abandoned decades ago after a gas explosion. The explosion took his hand, they said, and in his desperation, he fashioned a replacement out of a jagged iron hook. The legend claimed he went mad, stalking the tunnels and killing anyone who ventured inside. A ghost story, right? We didn't believe a word of it. At least not then. It started as a dare, with Zach laying it on thick. People still hear him down there, he said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. That scraping sound is Hook against the walls. If you're quiet, you might even hear it calling you. Dylan laughed it off, calling it ridiculous, and Kayla, our other friend, just shrugged, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. I wasn't so sure. The stories of people disappearing around the mines weren't just rumors. They were fact. But when Dylan teased me for hesitating, I couldn't back down. Fine, I said. Let's do it. We reached the entrance to the mine just before midnight. It was massive, framed by rotting wooden beams tangled with weeds. The air was heavy with moisture, and as we stepped inside, the darkness seemed to swallow us whole. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing jagged walls slick with condensation. The further we went, the colder it got, the air thick and hard to breathe. The walls were streaked with what looked like rust, but as my flashlight swept across them, I noticed it wasn't just rust. It was smeared in odd patterns, too thick and uneven. Is that blood? I muttered, but no one answered. Kayla stopped short, her beam catching something etched into the rock. Hooks, crude carvings of hooks gouged into the walls, hundreds of them, overlapping and jagged. This is seriously creepy, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. It's just someone messing around, Dylan said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Then we heard it, a faint scraping sound, distant but unmistakable. We froze. My grip tightened on the flashlight as my pulse raced. Probably just a bat, Zach said, but his voice wavered. The sound came again, louder this time, metal against stone, deliberate and steady. A chill ran down my spine. We stood there listening until suddenly something shot past Zach's head. His flashlight hit the ground with a clatter. The cords severed clean. Run! Dylan yelled. Chaos erupted. We scattered, the tunnels branching in every direction. I sprinted blindly, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, the scraping grew louder, joined by a faint metallic clinking. I didn't dare look back. I stumbled into a larger chamber, my legs burning and chest heaving. The air here was heavier, reeking of decay. As my flashlight swept across the room, my stomach lurched. Bones, hundreds of them, piled haphazardly on the ground. Among them were rusted helmets, torn boots, and shattered mining tools. This was no accident. Then I saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows, massive and hunched, his face obscured. But the hook, that twisted, rusted piece of iron glinting in the light, was unmistakable. He dragged it across the wall, the sound grating and deliberate. My breath caught as his head tilted slightly toward me, as if he could sense me even through the darkness. I turned and ran, my legs screaming in protest, my flashlight barely lighting the path ahead. The tunnels twisted and turned, endless and unforgiving, but somehow, I found my way back to the entrance. Dylan and Zach were there, their faces pale and drawn. Maya! Dylan shouted, grabbing my arm. "Where's Kayla?" Before I could answer, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the depths of the mine. We turned just in time to see her flashlight beam jerking wildly as she was yanked backward into the shadows. Her scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the hookman's scraping hook. "Kayla!" I screamed, lunging forward, but Dylan held me back. His grip was unyielding, his eyes wide with terror. "We can't," he shouted. "We'll die if we go back." I fought against him, tears streaming down my face, but deep down, I knew he was right. The three of us bolted out of the mine, the cold night air hitting us like a slap. We never went back. The authorities sealed the mine a week later, citing unstable conditions, but we knew the truth. Kayla was never found. The guilt gnawed at me, and even now, I can't shake the image of her being dragged into the darkness, her screams echoing in my ears. Dylan, Zach, and I drifted apart after that night. None of us wanted to talk about it. What could we say? That we'd gone looking for a ghost story and found something far worse? But sometimes, late at night, I hear it, the faint scraping of metal against stone, as if the hookman is still out there, waiting for someone else to venture too close. Waiting for me.